Today we'll be talking with Jim Higdon. We're super excited to have him on the program. He wrote a book called Cornbread Mafia about cannabis cultivation in central Kentucky, about where we're from, and one of the co-founders of Cornbread Hemp, a USDA organic certified CBD company based out of Kentucky, along with his cousin Eric Zipperle. Jim Higdon graduated from Center College in Kentucky, as well as Brown and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. I'd like to welcome to the program Jim Higdon. Pre-show note, in the WeFunder round that we talk about a year and a half ago, I did invest in that. So if that turns you off from this conversation, I won't be offended, but it's a good one.
She said, now I'm a red-headed galactic installation portal revolving around the sun. I know I'm here and that it means love everyone.
You have an Instagram page to rebuild, right?
I'm sorry. My God, among other things.
For sure. So getting started to the interview portion, you want to start out talking about Cornbread Hemp and in particular the USDA organic seal? Because there have been many people who have told me that you can't get one. So I'm interested to give them.
Sure. So we started Cornbread Hemp in 2019, my cousin Eric Zipperle and I, and we were the first Kentucky company to get products certified organic by the USDA. By the end of 2019, we were rolling those out in early 2020.
And on a very short list across the nation, too.
And on a short list across the nation, fewer than 5% of CBD brands have certified organic products. And so it puts us in a rather select group. And of those with organic certification in CBD space, very few of them are full spectrum products. Most of them are THC free. So we really are, standing out as a CBD brand with certified organic products with a legal amount of THC in our products. So,
and along with the full spectrum on your website, you explain what full spectrum means for you all, as well as your sort of terminology for what you're referring to and comparing yourselves to.
Sure. One of the things that we learned is that inside the industry, full spectrum is well understood, but for a general consumer and the general public, no one knows that full spectrum contains THC. So
among other things, right?
Well, among other things, but I mean, CBN, CBG, terpenes and flavonoids, like the sort of full gamut of compounds created by the flower. But the most relevant piece of that is the THC content, specifically because the variety of CBD product that does not contain THC is often referred to as broad spectrum, and full spectrum is sort of the opposite of broad spectrum. And the thing that those two products have are most, the thing that defines those two products is whether or not it contains THC. So full spectrum, even though it contains much more than just CBD and THC, is become shorthand for CBD products that do contain THC. But as you say, among other things.
Mm-hmm. And bouncing off of the THC, you're also sort of notable because you have a much higher THC percentage, not just the presence of it, but even as compared to other specifically legal CBD companies, your THC percentage is much higher than what other people are achieving.
The quintessential full spectrum CBD brand is Charlotte's Web, and their THC levels are quite low. And we're really leaning into maximizing our THC level as allowed by federal law. So
in particular, the gummies, right?
0. In particular, the gummies, but also our whole flower oil, the 1,500 milligram whole flower oil and the gummies have the same ratio and milligrams of THC per dose, 2 milligrams of Delta 9 per dose in the gummies, as well as the whole flower oil. So
and 60 in the entire package, right?
Bestsellers. 60 milligrams of Delta 9 THC in the whole in the whole, either the jar of gummies or the bottle of whole flower oil. Correct.
Which is interesting too, because you look at legal states with cannabis, and I mean, even in Illinois, where I was working up until recently, 100 milligrams of THC was the absolute cap. So you're approaching something that people are doing in legal states. It just so happens that the ratios work out, right?
Yeah, it's about the ratio. We're at a 25-1 CBD to THC ratio with our current products, and there's definitely some R&D going on the ratio side. And CBD counteracts a lot of the psychoactive effects of the THC. So saying that,
well, it depends, right? It depends on that ratio.
Correct. It depends on the ratio, but like our products are not designed to get our customers high, even though it does contain enough Delta 9 THC to be measurable by the milligram. It's the THC in our products, as they're currently formulated, are in a supporting role to the CBD, and just helps the CBD work better. Our customers feel our products sort of in their body, sort of neck down, not chin up. There's not a lot of headspace effect from our products, but the THC is there to help the CBD do its work in the body.
And I noticed that you're describing these effects, and like your customers report these effects in a very particular way. Would you like to talk about that reason?
Well, part of the reason is that there's no FDA regulations on our products as dietary supplements or anything else, and so it's difficult for me as a brand co-founder to say our products do X or our products do Y. We talk about how our customers respond to our products and what our customers are looking for in our products, because one, it's really all about our customers and what our customers want. And also, by talking about it anecdotally from the point of view of our customers, it allows us to talk about how our customers feel about our products without us saying very straightforward that our products do X, Y, or Z.
Well, this is a problem even cannabis companies still have, right? You're not allowed to make medical claims about your products because the FDA, as it envisions its oversight in this space, does not perceive our product to be a drug, and consequently, so to make a medical claim from the FDA's perspective is to say that a product diagnoses, prevents, or cures a certain disease, or treats, diagnose, prevent, cure, or treat a disease. And so we have to be mindful that our products are not designed for that purpose. Our products are designed as dietary supplements, which support healthy bodily function in a variety of ways, whether that's supporting a healthy sleep cycle or supporting good mental health. So a person, can take our products and have their own natural, healthy bodily systems supported by our product, but our product is not intended to diagnose or cure any disease as the FDA says it. The FDA is governed and empowered by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which was written decades ago. And when it was written, it never envisioned plant-based medicine or cannabis-based medicine or cannabis-based supplementation, cannabis-based anything. And cannabis as a plant with a variety of active compounds affecting the body and the mind in a variety of ways is something that is kind of outside the scope of how the FDA governs itself. It's not something that the FDA, from its regimented bureaucratic understanding of its lane in government regulation, it's not something that it really envisioned. So, when cannabis gets legalized at the federal level, it's probably going to require additionally, in addition to legalizing cannabis, a review and a revision of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, so the FDA has a better understanding of how to regulate cannabis products, so that cannabis brands, cannabis companies can better talk to customers and consumers in a way that is accurate and true. separate out the regulations, right? If we're entering a market where, like in your all's case, it's going to be oils, it's going to be gummies, it's going to be things that are taken orally or like a lotion, that is going to have a very different set of regulations, I think, probably than something like flour or something that's intended to be vaporized or inhaled.
Right. I mean, the FDA had, the only thing the FDA is doing relative to vape and smoking products is sending out warning letters to vape companies, which they do, rather regularly, and probably for good reasons. I'm not going to get in the FDA's lane on expressing concern about nicotine vape companies, but they certainly have not envisioned vaping or smoking a product as a benefit or a positive, as whether that's medical or as a supplement. And so there's definitely work to do on the not just the legalization side, but then the regulation side on the other side of legalization, to help the government get its bureaucratic head around how people are using this plant and for what purpose, and how to best regulate the use of that plant in the way that people are using it, which is smoking and vaporizing it, in addition to the sorts of products that we offer at Cornbread Hemp, which, as you said, is gummies, oils, topicals, pet products, capsules. We're making ingestible and topical products from flour. Kentucky state law does not allow us to sell flour or pre-rolls or anything like that, which is a shame, but that's just the world that we currently live in. And even if Kentucky state law did allow us to, it might not be a decision that we make, because, we're so focused on maintaining the integrity of the USDA organic supply chain. And if the organic program had issues with it, we wouldn't do it.
Do you think that there's any chance that like we might see flour come in for CBD, even if it through some sort of like hemp flour bill in the next upcoming years? Or do you think it'll probably be flour comes in when cannabis is fully realized?
Well, flour, as I understand it, is legal under federal law. It's just that law enforcement and prohibition forces in Kentucky saw this coming around the corner and were able to pass legislation in Kentucky to ban the sale of hemp flour, mostly because law enforcement enjoys using the smell of cannabis as a reason to violate Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. And so a police officer can say, I smell marijuana, so I'm going to search your person, I'm going to search your vehicle, I'm going to search your glove box and your trunk, I'm going to search your house, which they would ordinarily need a warrant for. But if they smell marijuana, they can bypass warrant requirements and do whatever they like. And even if they don't actually smell cannabis and just want to search someone, they can tell the judge later that they smell cannabis, and there's really no reason or no way to verify whether or not that's true.
Yeah, you can't exactly pull up the numbers on someone's sniff test.
Correct. So it really is, law enforcement officer's word against defendant in courtroom, which typically, especially in a place like Kentucky, judges tend to defer to law enforcement. And
absolutely.
So do legislators in Frankfurt. So because law enforcement wants to maintain that power of searching whoever they want to, whenever they want to, they are interested in maintaining a firm prohibition on flour, because if hemp flour is legal, the smell of hemp flour is legal, then the smell of cannabis can no longer be automatically sure to be, a crime being committed, and therefore Fourth Amendment protections going out the window. So places like Colorado, New York City, I think even California, a number of places have removed the smell of cannabis as a probable cause to effect a search by law enforcement, and the world has not ended in those places. So it's just a matter of time, but it's something that law enforcement does not want to give up, and it's something that legislators are going to have to make law enforcement give up as constituents continue to demand safe access to cannabis flower.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that, according to the ACLU in 2018, African American people were arrested at 10 times the rate that a white Kentuckian might be for this same offense, just possessing
crazy.
cannabis.
Absolutely, 100%. This is a way for law enforcement to harass Black people, full stop. And one of the insidious problems with the current state of affairs is that white people who are generally not invested or engaged on this issue don't understand it to be a problem, because it's not a problem that affects them or their families in their daily lives. And they only hear about it as something that's affecting another group of people who don't look like them. And it's difficult in some cases for those white people to understand what a problem that is. In 2019, which used to be really recent, but is increasingly far away, the Washington Post ran a data visualization of arrests in America for marijuana possession by county, and had all 50 states broke down by county with color-coded maps with deep colors for counties with high arrests for cannabis possession, and light colors for counties with low arrests for cannabis possession. And Kentucky painted a really fascinating picture on this map. Most of Kentucky enjoys California levels of
Enforcement.
Non-enforcement. Like most counties are not enforcing marijuana possession rules. The counties that are enforcing those rules are the counties where there's Black people: Louisville and Lexington, Jefferson, Fayette County, Warren County, where Bowling Green is, Christian County, where Hopkinsville is. Places with large Black populations in Kentucky are the counties where marijuana possession laws are being enforced. And in the counties where there's not those high populations of Black people, the laws are just not enforced at all. It's an apartheid system where this one law is being used exclusively against Black people, or nearly exclusively against Black people, and white people don't understand it to be a problem because it's not affecting them directly.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's also what's interesting about sort of the history that you talk about from your particular area about, how do I phrase this correctly? That there's also a divide in that sort of white area of Kentucky where there are differences county to county. And I think even like in different spots of a county where there are different understanding of maybe what the generally agreed on rules are for how cannabis is dealt with, whether legally or illegally.
Sure. I mean, I'm from Marion County, as you know, and I wrote the Cornbread Mafia book about Marion County and Nelson and Washington County. Nelson, where you're from. So, like in that Catholic region of central Kentucky, there's definitely a laissez-faire attitude against, about cannabis and cannabis cultivation, cannabis use. Whereas in areas just adjacent to it that are more conservative evangelical Christian, in the culture of the county, very much seen as very negative in sort of a traditional sense. But then
we even still see it in wet and dry counties.
Well, sure. So Kentucky is, for folks who don't realize, when Kentucky legalized alcohol sales after Prohibition, it was given to the counties to have wet-dry votes, whether that county would be wet or dry. Increasingly in Kentucky, that has softened, and most counties have some sort of wetness or moist or damp, depending on where you fall culturally in those counties. It's not nearly as black and white in the wet and dry wet and dry cultures as it was when I was younger. So there is evidence that that times change and people's opinions on these things change relative to alcohol in that sense, and then cannabis generally. What I was going to say is, you go out, if you look at Eastern Kentucky, and even to a lesser extent in around Land Between the Lakes in Western Kentucky, because of property seizure laws, illegal cannabis cultivators want to grow cannabis, but not on their own property because they don't want to risk losing their land. So they're growing it on federal land. I'm sure, I think you're out in California now, so you get this sense out in California's federal lands as well.
Dan Boone National Forest.
Daniel Boone National Forest is a perfect example. Because of property seizure laws, illegal growers are going into national forests to grow cannabis, and creates a lot of ecological damage when they do that. But the reason they're doing it is not because they're bad people, it's because they're evading bad laws. If there weren't property seizure laws for cannabis cultivation, they wouldn't do that. Grow it on their own land where it's more convenient, but they're not growing it on their own land because they risk losing their land if they're caught. It's the property seizure law that's the insidious catalyst and driver of that particular issue. But those counties that surround Daniel Boone National Forest are very familiar with cannabis cultivation because people are moving into those lands, into those counties to grow on those lands because it's a way to grow it without risking losing one's own property.
Mm-hmm. And I think I also would like to make that point too. You take a very particular focus on an area of Kentucky that's more local, and you mentioned that it's a wider Kentucky thing, but I think that people in Kentucky also don't realize, like with the alcohol industry, this can be a boon everywhere. Like we can all share in this if we get on board. For a long time where we were from, there are a lot of distilleries around there. And I think it took a long time for people to get on board with a distillery, sort of like you said. And I think part of that was jobs, tax revenue, seeing the success of the industry. But when it comes to wet and dry counties, I almost want to say, why is this not just a slam dunk? We all know where this is going. We know you're going to want this eventually. Just come in now.
There's a cultural divide. There's a generational divide. Under 50 is cool in the gang, and over 50 is, like still dangerous territory for this topic. Like anyone of my parents' generation, baby boomers who grew up in the 60s, whose politics were shaped by the Vietnam War and the protests surrounding it and the Nixon administration, still see cannabis not just as dangerous but politically against their interests. They see it as a negative influence in American life in a way that is wrong and counterproductive. But it's just how those people were raised to believe and behave. Is there's just a mindset with older people that cannabis is bad, and it's difficult to shake that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also a lot of people see only the industry side of this, which is going to be enormous, and like there's going to be a lot of room. But I think that a lot of times with things like home grow as well, and the other part of cannabis and of hemp, letting people have access to it because they're probably going to get the best benefits themselves. And that doesn't mean they're not still going to buy products, but there are benefits to this by just letting people have access to it too.
Well, 100%. When we're looking at this, in places like New Jersey, that's legalized recreational cannabis, but not home grow. So recreational cannabis is legal in New Jersey, but if you grow one plant, it's a felony. It's just an absurd, it's just an absurd state of affairs that's still an issue. Like you can have fully legal cannabis, but not home grow. There's some industry and some law enforcement, to put it in the context of where we're from in Kentucky, it's that Baptist bootlegger coalition that maintains prohibition. Baptists and bootleggers have nothing in common except for they're both against legalizing it, because that's where both preachers and criminals are making their money, is either by demonizing it or by peddling it in an illegal way. So in the case of New Jersey, it's the industry that like the big multi-state operator cannabis industry combined with prohibitionist groups and law enforcement groups that are keeping home grow illegal, but it's not a status quo that's maintainable. It's absurd on its face. You can't have legal cannabis and no home grow. You can't grow one plant and have a felony if you can go down the street and buy an ounce.
Especially when the tax rate is 30 to 40%. That feels even more insidious when you put the two together.
Right. And in every state still trying to figure out taxation, like California, chief among equals, having sort of the longest amount of time to figure this out. And California just naturally wanting to tax things the way California likes to tax things, still driving people into the black and gray markets. Like bringing cannabis into the mainstream business economy and culture, and the taxable economy has not been an easy lift in any regard. I'm not sure which state is doing it best, but definitely there's a risk of overtaxing cannabis because it just diverts more and more resources into the black market.
And kills your industry too. Any sort of lower down people who might be working a little bit harder or being at a smaller scale. If you have less resources and you're going through this 30 to 40% tax ratio, that's going to hurt you way harder because you have less room to run. And I mean, I think that's also a part of it as well. I'm not sure if you could really point that down to a hard case, but I think the context of the conversation is also, there have been a lot of companies that have gone out of business in California due to the taxation driving people to the black market.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to, it's hard for people in other places to get their heads around what's going on in California. So it's something that every state kind of has to grapple with themselves. And really, everyone's waiting for federal leadership on this matter. And as we're sitting here talking, there was an opportunity for the Safe Banking Act to be tucked into the Defense Appropriations and Debt Limit Bill in Congress. And somehow at the last minute, it was kicked out of that bill, leaving it kind of on the sidelines. So once again, Congress has not allowed cannabis businesses to have access to the banking sector, which won't solve necessarily the taxation problem, but would begin to normalize the cannabis industry in the financial services sector, which is a step in that direction, and we still can't get that done. So, a lot of this is happening at the state level and in bad policy at the state level because of the lack of leadership from the feds and Congress at the federal level. And everyone's just kind of trying to figure it out on their own without any leadership from up top.
And it's especially hard, I think, with the whole banking situation, trying to separate out from a black market when you're making every legal business do the entire process only in cash. Pay your taxes in cash, have cash on hand for everything.
Right. I mean, payroll in cash, inventory in cash, and then, makes all these businesses vulnerable to theft and robbery. And it's an inefficient way of doing business, and it certainly does not incentivize people to come out of the shadows and to participate in the above ground economy when you're not giving them the resources to do so. So, we've got a long way to go, even though we've come as far as we have.
I think I should also mention that you all crowdfunded the first part of your all's business. That's also something that will open up, allow people access to capital so that they can start to work on these businesses a little more freely.
Right. So we were really fortunate with the crowdfund on WeFunder. We were one of the first CBD brands on WeFunder. We ended up meeting 900 investors, raising $400,000 last year on the WeFunder platform. Really great way to meet new customers, as we're also, making investors out of them. We had a very low limit on the on the investment, so we had people in for just a couple $100, just to give them a piece of equity in what we're growing here. And then all this year, we've been putting that capital to work and growing our business, meet new customers. So we've had a very successful year this year because of that fundraise that we did last year on WeFunder.
And then I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about the utility of cannabis in Kentucky, particularly. Kentucky's been really hard hit by the opioid epidemic, in part because I think through prescriptions, just getting the prescriptions through a lot of Kentucky counties and sending them elsewhere. There's also, I think, a part of this cannabis conversation that is getting skipped over, which is drugs in Kentucky in the wider scale.
Well, it's being used both ways. Like prohibitionists and law enforcement groups are using the opioid addiction crisis in Kentucky as a reason to be against cannabis legalization, which is wrongheaded and completely contrary to any sort of evidence that anyone can present. But because of the reality of the opioid epidemic and the problems that it's caused across the state, particularly in the East, but not exclusively so, it's given rise to messaging from prohibition groups, law enforcement groups that, well, the last thing we need is another legal drug because look what happened to opioids, which is asinine and frustrating and infuriating.
And not an argument. It's nonsensical.
To encounter, but one certainly encounters that line of, right. There's no sense to it, but there's no sense to the prohibition in the first place anyway. Like it's just a power grab, and then these arguments are justifications for that power grab, or the loosening of that power grab as reform advocates start to chip away at it. So I mean, we heard the same thing when we were trying to legalize hemp in Kentucky in 2013, and like none of those horror stories that law enforcement presented have come to pass. But it's not about these groups having logical, reasonable, like well thought out arguments. It's about them having power and then using justifications to maintain that power. It's not an argument to win over the, like for someone to understand logically. It's just a power move.
Mm-hmm. Well, we saw that. You see it every year, right? There's poisoned cannabis with fentanyl in it. There's cannabis with all of these other nasty drugs that if you consume cannabis, you might consume something else.
Right. And that fentanyl cannabis stuff, had been, floated around as a scare tactic, but now I think, like there seems to be credible reports of that actually existing in the world. But it's all the more reason to have a legal system where all the cannabis is tested and the supply chains are inspected so that sort of stuff doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also it existing is not evidence of a widespread problem, right?
Well, it existing at all is frightening. And one of the problems about living in an illegal, a state without legal safe access to cannabis like Kentucky is one of 14 states without any safe access to cannabis, is it makes us the recipients of cannabis from legal states that didn't pass a test. If cannabis didn't pass a test for a microbial or a fungus or a pesticide, and it is not good enough for the Nevada market or the California market, and that growers got 20 pounds of it, I mean, they just put it in a UPS shipment and send it off to, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. I mean, people in an illegal state, they can't test it, they'll smoke it. So
and for the most part now, I think it's also not flour, it's concentrated products, which makes the problem even more important.
Correct, because when you're doing concentrates, when you concentrate the cannabinoids, you're also concentrating the contaminants, and so you're getting a heavy dose of whatever negative contaminant you have in there, which is all the more reason to bring it back to Cornbread Hemp while we voluntarily submit ourselves to the USDA organic standard, which is a very high standard of agricultural production, but we're making concentrates. And so like if there's any impurities, if there's any pesticides in our product or heavy metals or anything like that, they become even more dangerous in concentrated form. So
you also have COAs, terpene analysis. Like you all do a lot of things that a lot of other mainstream cannabis companies are still catching up on.
Well, yeah. Well, the terpene analysis, thank you for pointing that out, is really important because our more sophisticated customers want to see it. They want to see that we have humulene and caryophyllene and these very specific cannabis related terpenes that are in our product. And so it's worth the extra expense on the lab test side to verify that we have a good terpene profile. Terpenes are really volatile. They're difficult to even get in an analysis in a concentrated form, just because they kind of spin out of the bottle as soon as you open them up. So it's to have a good terpene profile in a lab report for a product is important, because we're a premium brand. We're the maker's mark of hemp products, and in order to justify that kind of status in the industry, we've got to have the lab reports to back it up.
Well, it's just the ensurement of quality, right? You're putting your money where your mouth is.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, we're Kentucky's the best place in the world to grow cannabis, and the best way to grow cannabis is organically by the standard of the USDA organic program. And so having an organic brand from Kentucky, we're really, planting a flag in the fact that we're making the best products that are 50 state legal that are available. That's what we do.
Well, and hopefully I would love to see, this is pie in the sky a little bit, but every cannabis company and every hemp company move for that USDA organic label eventually and make that the path forward, right? Not just stopping here, but how can we continually make this process better so that we're helping Kentucky, the state, not just are we advancing the Kentucky cannabis industry, right? Protecting our resources.
I mean, I'm certainly happy that our larger competitors are not certified organic, because it gives us an advantage in the market. But as consumers become more sophisticated and demand better products, it's where the industry is going.
And in a changing climate, right? You look at the bourbon industry and how much they say that they put emphasis on keeping clean water to make their product. There is an integral part to this where if we play it wrong, 20 to 30 years down the road, we're going to keep getting back the wrong results on these lab tests and not be able to do anything until we rehabilitate where we're growing.
Well, in terms of the sustainability, the sustainability aspects of growing hemp in Kentucky to the organic standard really don't show up on the lab test. We're talking about crop rotation and rain-fed and sun-grown
IPM
outdoor, and growing it in a place like Kentucky that's not subjected to the drought conditions that are happening in Western states, nor with the industrial scale irrigation that requires that hemp requires in states like Colorado. Like the Colorado River Basin is running dry, and Colorado is growing all of this hemp, not because Colorado is the best place to grow hemp. It's not. It's because Colorado has the best political environment to grow hemp, not the best agricultural environment.
Which brings up an interesting indoor-outdoor conversation too.
Absolutely. And in the carbon footprint of indoor grown cannabis is incredibly high compared to outdoor grown, sun grown cannabis, like we use in cornbread hemp, and like Kentucky has been growing for 250 years. Outdoor grown, rain fed, sun grown cannabis is the most sustainable way to grow cannabis, even if it doesn't give you high times like hot pornography nugs filled with crystals. You don't need nugs full of crystals to get the effect of cannabis if you're interested in growing sustainably in a way that's responsible.
And a lot of the research is showing that if you do grow outside, you're getting more varied terpene profiles and even larger amounts of terpenes and cannabinoids than if you grow inside. Like the sun is not replaceable as easily as we think it is.
In some of these places are supplementing sunlight with like low power LEDs and like
mixed light greenhouses and
doing it smart, and that's where this all is headed. But then also when you're growing indoors, you're not impacting beneficial insects like bees, whereas like what we've seen anecdotally in Kentucky with the hemp crop is that bees just flourish.
Also, in terms of talking about taking the Kentucky out of a product, the whole idea behind this is that Kentucky is really good at growing cannabis, growing hemp. Just like with the bourbon industry, there's something unique to the area. If you bring it inside, we've just eliminated a lot of the arguments we just made for why we want this in the first place or what the craft of it is to us.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's interesting too because I think that there is a strong background, maybe I should say, of Kentucky allowing outside interests to sort of monopolize the resources and build the business on top and justify that with jobs, with other statements, without going first to people from Kentucky and saying, hey, let's go local first.
Well, that's certainly the case with the coal and extraction industries in Eastern Kentucky. Outside groups coming and, taking the value out of the land without giving the people much in return. Now with the bourbon industry is still more homegrown with sort of generational legacy. So the bourbon industry doesn't have quite that negative reputation that extraction coal mining industries have. And with the hemp industry, Kentucky's experienced lots of outside groups and big money coming in from other states, other countries, and then doing wrong by the locals in a number of ways. I won't get into it here, but
those bastards at Gencana,
for instance. But they're not. That's not an isolated case, right? That's not. Mm-hmm. That's not the only place that where these things have happened. But starting our company like we did in 2019, which is very much a version 2.0, Kentucky hemp brands had been around, Kentucky hemp companies had been around since 2014. And so we were able to learn from the mistakes of a lot of people who preceded us, including these sort of, big international corporate interests that were coming in, making big promises and not paying off those promises, and causing a lot of unnecessary heartache in the farming community as a result of their grand schemes that went bust, partly because it was all based on FDA coming in with regulations in a timely fashion that never happened, and that crushed a lot of business models, but also just a lot of dishonesty and big money thinking that it could create its own reality when it could not.
And basing those numbers, I think, like you said, off of a price model that was never going to come through, especially when a lot of these farmers were growing hemp for the first time, possibly. A lot of small farmers who thought this might be the saving grace, and this was possibly the last ditch.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of farmers put a lot of work into hemp, thinking it was gonna save them from the hole they were in, and just made the hole bigger. Like, it breaks my heart to know what some of these farmers suffered at the hands of false promises from both politicians and businesses who told them their land and their hemp was going to be worth X when it ended up being worth Y, and Y wasn't a lot. And in some cases, farmers got stuck. The 2019 harvest is still sitting out there. Like, I think, a lot of farmers even destroyed a 2019 harvest because there was just no buyer for it.
And I think that's a really important point. Like you talked about, there were promises made, right? A lot of this is not on the farmers. It's on the people, especially in positions of power and leadership, who said, hey, we're going to make these things happen. And so far, I think the consequences have been kind of minimal.
The consequences have been minimal, which is frustrating, mostly because these politicians helped to legalize the plant to a certain point and then thought or think that that's the end of the road, that there's no need for further legalization when nothing could be further from the truth. This is just step one of a long journey of legalizing the plant entirely. And if those politicians aren't going to be leaders in the space to help to continue to legalize it, then other people are going to have to step in and do it for them.
Exactly. And I think that's an important point. I know that oftentimes, I think in a couple of interviews, you've talked about looking to the future of the industry. I think it's a little bit heartbreaking that we're going through this route of, look at all these brick walls other people have gone through. Let's run through every single one of them instead of just walking around and cutting further up the road. Like, we understand some beneficial things we can go ahead and start talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like we're one of 14 states without a medical program. We can look around and see how the medical program is playing out in Virginia and West Virginia and Ohio,
Illinois.
and then fully legal cannabis in Illinois. The world hasn't ended.
Yeah. I worked in a recreational dispensary, and I had people coming from Kentucky to buy cannabis legally in Illinois. You can even look at the map. There are 4 dispensaries right on the border of Kentucky, and then another one now on the other side, I believe in either Virginia or West Virginia. We're sending our own customers out of the state.
Now, so talk to Kentuckians about the recreational market in Illinois. What's the limit per customer per day per dispensary? Like, what can a person from Kentucky go to Illinois and come back with?
If you were an Illinois resident in Illinois, when I was there a few months ago, you could get 30 grams of flour in addition to 500 milligrams of edibles, then 2.5 grams of 5 grams of concentrates or cartridges. If you're out of state, you have half of that. So 15 grams of flour, which is roughly a half ounce, 250 milligrams of edibles, then 2.5 grams of concentrate, which you can buy at the same time. You can get edibles, concentrates, and flour.
But what's the record keeping? So a person comes into dispensary A and buys the limit. Can they walk out and come back in and make another transaction? Or is that the limit for the day for that dispensary? Or can they go to dispensary B and also buy a half an ounce? Like, how's that part work?
We keep track, or when I was there, we would keep track of the customers that we had. So we do not, I think by law, we were not allowed to record keep the individuals who purchased at the dispensary recreationally. So we would scan their ID, swipe the data at the end of the day, and clear our banks. So we knew if you had purchased your limit that day, but you could go to a different dispensary if you wanted to and circumnavigate the system. But I think that's also a long-term, like when people get into these limits of how much you can have on you at one time, like I think those need to get raised too. No one's looking in the back of my truck if I have 6 or 7 or 10 cases of beer. It's just not.
Right. I mean, at a certain point, you become a beer distributor if you have too much beer, but it's not illegal for you to have that much beer.
No, true. But it's a question of numbers, right? Rather than.
But no, I've just had other Kentuckians ask me, like, hey, if I go to Illinois, like, what's my limit? Like, I understand, like, this is the limit per person, per purchase, per dispensary. But is there a database, like a Casper-like system that's tracking purchases statewide? And,
Nope.
And I didn't have an answer for them. So I think you've just sort of answered it for me, which is it's a per person limit per dispensary, and that dispensaries are not entering information into a shared system that would flag if someone went to a different dispensary.
Now, the interesting thing about that is that, one, that doesn't save you if you have all of the receipts and get pulled over and you have 4 ounces of cannabis. That's still a crime. Your possession limit is different than your purchase limit. They're sort of separate ideas. Like, you're allowed to have more at home as well. That's different than if you're out in public, walking around in your pocket. Now, medical patients have a set limit, which we've talked about is an issue at the dispensary itself, because we can actually sell less cannabis to a medical patient in the same time frame than we could to a recreational patient, because the medical patients are tied to a specific grammage in a set amount of time. It's just the taxes. So they can use up their medical limit, then go over to the other side and purchase recreationally, but they'll be paying those taxes.
I see. That's interesting.
Well, it is, because I think when we talk about the legislation, I don't think people are anticipating how complicated this is going to get if we keep running this route. Just going to other states, I think there may be a happy medium here of non-regulation and regulation. If you see what I'm saying here, rather than the strictest, we need to measure this down to the gram in every product for every dispensary. I think that it the bureaucracy of it kills your business. It's incredibly hard to keep track of. In Illinois, we had to run. I'm sorry, I'm going on here. I'm interviewing you, but we
Well,
had to
no,
do
this is good information for everybody. I'm interested.
But no, one of the absurd things about keeping track of all this is that we would have to do every day in a 24-hour period a full inventory of all of the stock that we had at the dispensary. Now, I'm sure you all don't have to do that at your place, but can you imagine the ridiculousness of having to every day go through every single one of your products and hand count how many you had in stock and verify that with a set list in the system?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly burdensome, and like, again, like, it's just a step towards, it's a, like, as it's a step towards fuller freedom and legalization in the future, but we got to get through these steps first. And it's great that other states are getting through these steps now. It's just so frustrating that here in Kentucky we're so far behind.
Well, that's also sort of, I think, the point I was trying to make earlier about the brick walls. We can learn from other states and jump to the cut a little bit and look ahead without having to piece by piece by piece. And I think that's more of a getting it past question than what's the best way to do it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If we were interested in doing it right, we could, we could study the best practices of neighboring and surrounding states and other states that, like, that look like Kentucky, like, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, states that, southern states that are agricultural in nature, that have found ways to legalize.
Or even, God forbid, take the lead ourselves.
Right. Well, just the law enforcement lobbying interest in Frankfurt is just so strong. Like, what people don't understand, what I often explain to people, is that because we don't have ballot referenda in Kentucky, we're forced to do everything by legislation. Now, about half of the 36 states that have legalized medical cannabis, about half of those states have done it legislatively. So it's not necessarily the case that everyone has to do it by ballot referenda, but it's certainly easier to do it by ballot referenda than do it legislatively, because politicians are behind the people where they are on this issue, because law enforcement's lobbying efforts are outsized. Like, I don't understand why law enforcement's lobbying efforts in places like Frankfurt are so effective, because they don't pull a lot of votes. But still, when legislators get to Frankfurt, they see those shiny boots and that gun on that hip, and they sure like to make those cops happy. And I just don't quite understand it.
It's so hard too, because, and maybe this would be a good, before we get in too much trouble, this might be towards the end of the conversation, but I mean, how many deaths have there been in Louisville recently in corrections custody? Breonna Taylor, the cannabis relationship to police is also hard because of the wider state of Kentucky police, like you're talking about.
Yeah, you've identified a real problem. Like, there's a real problem that Kentucky is not reconciling, and we've had a year-long conversation about it that's not gotten to a productive place. So, it's just difficult to unravel. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm getting hit with a number of things I got to get back to. I really appreciate the conversation. We definitely can circle back and talk more shop later. I think it's really great that Kentuckians are abroad and in the cannabis industry, and getting the word out about what a great place Kentucky is. If only our politicians in Frankfurt would allow us to be as great as we're able to be. Cornbread Hemp is here, making the strongest products that are allowed by law, with the USDA organic seal, in a way that we feel really represents the Kentucky hemp and Kentucky cannabis culture, and we look forward to a better day in the future.
Well, thank you for working towards cannabis in Kentucky too. I think it takes all Kentuckians, wherever they are, trying to bring focus to this issue, but thank you for what you've done in particular, not just with your company, but with your book. Like, you've been on this warpath for a while, particularly in Kentucky.
Well, thank you. the advice of our predecessors of being the change that we seek really is the guiding light of what we're doing here. Like being a hemp brand from Kentucky is affecting a lot of change in Kentucky as people see us as a visible representation of what the possibilities of the future can hold.
Jim, thank you for coming on, sir.
Elijah, thanks for having me.